Hello and welcome back to 100% Real with Ruby. We have another mindset moment today, but this one's more like a mindset orgasm because we have, well, a lot to dig into, but at the same time, it's quite unison in its theme. And we were talking offline just before on like, what is true motivation? And Thomas was going on about how it's so bullshit when people are quick to dismiss the fact that you don't need to be motivated. And it also got me thinking about something I listened to recently where it isn't really motivation as a feeling, because it's just like when people say they feel fat, like feeling fat has nothing to do with like being fat itself. Like you can be doing everything amazingly, feeling really good, then one day you feel fat. Like it's more than that. And just same with motivation, it's more than just feeling motivated. And something I was listening to recently was digging into the skills. Everything you do in the gym, everything you apply to your training, your nutrition, the whole journey on transforming yourself. I did just put this into an Instagram post, by the way. But the whole act of transforming yourself is a force multiplier. It goes beyond that. It reeks into the fact that you'll become more productive. You'll go for more opportunities in business and in life. But all of that, why? It's because you're developing a skill. You're developing a skill base. Motivation is a skill that you develop. And you need to, like, what is true motivation? And as Thomas was saying, he literally said, it's not this surface level bullshit. It's not feeling motivation. It's all this stuff that I actually do to set me out from all the other bullshit all the other coaches are saying. Like, it's about the identity. It's about what really moves you. It's about resilience, about your beliefs, and digging more into those. So I guess with everything that's going on in the world, with people going into lockdowns, with coronavirus still around, vacations, whatever it is, this is where it really becomes even more important, because that thing that you were once attached to, that gym, that training session, that routine is now out the window. And it leaves a lot of people feeling lost. And that's when they start to realize, who the fuck am I? Like, who am I? Like, what is my purpose anymore? And it leaves a lot of people feeling lost. And they realize they don't actually have an identity, because they've just clinged to this external thing. So I guess that's where I'm going to leave it and let Thomas take over, because there's so much to go down here. And yeah.
Thanks, Ruby. I suppose if we try to give a rundown of what this episode is meant to be about, which is primarily just giving people a bunch of tools, a bunch of skills, a bunch of mental perspectives on how best to cope mentally with lockdown in particular, but realistically any particularly challenging or stressful period. And so we'll touch on what you just spoke about, which is identity, because I think that's one of the biggest factors in resilience, which doesn't really get addressed a whole lot. And we tend to think of, or when we talk about resilience, people tend to think of the traditional standard stuff, which is extremely important, and I can't speak highly enough of it, around gratitude, mindfulness, empathy, and we'll talk about all those kind of things, and basic health, nutrition, exercise, etc. But realistically, everything that goes on inside our head is created by ourselves, and it's to do with our perception of situations and things like that. And so I think it's not quite enough to just talk about gratitude and mindfulness and stuff when we're talking about resilience, because we need to basically address something like the thing about lockdown, as you say, right? It takes away so many things that people typically rely on. So maybe it's the gym, or it's their training, or it's socializing, or it's impacted your work or your career. And ultimately, just about everything we do, or so much of what we do and so much of what we feel and how we act, stems or comes back to our self-image and our identity. And so I think one of the most important steps we can take towards becoming more resilient is having an identity, or developing or cultivating an identity that is more adaptable and is more within our control and isn't at the mercy of external circumstances, right? So to give you an example, if someone's identity is heavily wrapped up in one particular area, right? Let's use fitness as an example. I've fallen very much into this trap myself in the past of I had too many of my identity eggs in the fitness basket of like, it was my training, it was the fact that I was a fitness educator and a PT and all this kind of stuff. And so what would happen was that when my training was going well and when my clients were going well, and I felt like I was in a good rhythm with what I was wanting to teach in fitness and all that kind of stuff. And it was like, and that area of life was going well, I was good, I was fine. And then if I got injured or, my clients weren't getting the results that I was hoping to get for them and all these kind of things, it was like my mood would ride the waves with how that area of life was going, because my whole identity was wrapped up in one particular thing. And that was a really dangerous path that I took myself down. Whereas when we have an identity that's a little more adaptable and a little more fluid, it means that we can respond to situations like a lockdown that's taken away, say, the gym, or maybe it's impacted your social life, or it's impacted your career or work or finances or whatever. And if we have an identity of, for example, simply being someone who is a learner, someone who is fascinated with adapting to a challenging situation and growing from it mentally, well, then suddenly now you've got this identity of someone who actually almost benefits from these situations. And so we're trying to sort of let ourselves be not so singularly defined by one particular area, such as, say, your fitness in the gym, or your career, or maybe it's kind of like your social life, so to speak. Because now when lockdown or whatever it might be takes those things away, then you've sort of had this massive pillar like pulled out from underneath you. Whereas if we can have this identity of being, okay, I am someone with the identity of being a really good supportive friend. Well, you can do that through any situation, and you can be the person who shows up for their mates during lockdowns, during a challenging time. And your identity hasn't been so rocked by a lockdown, by a really stressful, period of change. Now, that's just identity. We've got a million other things we can talk about. That's one area of resilience that I think doesn't get much love, is understanding that, like just about everything we do and feel, so much of it comes back to our self-image. And when our self-image is like kind of under fire, or getting, going through an earthquake kind of thing, that really messes with us.
You're touching on environment right now, as in a physical environment. Maybe we can also integrate the social environment of it all, because sometimes we attach our identity to how others perceive us, which is actually
Totally.
one of the biggest issues. And that's pretty much the real reason behind why we are lost with our physical environment, because we have this need to be perceived in a certain way, to exceed expectations in a certain way. So with that at the core, how exactly does that blend into our approaches next?
That's a very good question. And that's something I've given a lot of thought to lately, because, typically the advice we all see flying around on social media or whatever it might be is to, quote unquote, not care what people think, not let what other people think affect you. And absolutely that is true to an extent, in the sense that, we shouldn't allow the opinions of others to really influence or to stop us from pursuing what's meaningful to us and acting in a way that's authentic to us. However, I think we need to consider, and we'll talk about the fact that human connection and relationships, number one factor in everything, like number one factor in resilience, number one factor in happiness and health and well-being, is the quality of our relationships and how socially connected we feel. And we'll go into that in a second. But the reason I wanted to touch on that is that I actually think we should use caring what other people think about us to our advantage, rather than treating it as something to eliminate, right? As in, what I mean by that is, the fact is, whether we like it or not, like, we are hardwired to care what other people think. We're social creatures. We have become the dominant species on the planet because we learned to live in tribes and cooperate and communicate and all this good stuff. And so whether we like it or not, our brains are hardwired to care what people think. One of the key ingredients in passion, one of the key ingredients in passion is social feedback. Is when you have this thing and you get curious about it and you learn and you do some stuff, and then you get social feedback from other people that, hey, I like what you're doing. Simple example is like, you start playing an instrument and you're like, oh yeah, this is kind of cool, I'm really enjoying this. And it becomes true passion when you get social feedback and people are like, oh man, like you're really good at this. Like, I really like your music, keep doing that. And that's when you, like, that gives your brain enough fire to go like, oh, this is actually worth pursuing. Social feedback is really important to us, whether we like it or not. And so I think it's a little bit naive to say that we can completely stop caring what other people think, because we can't. We're hardwired to care what other people think. It's just that we need to use that to our advantage, and instead allow that to drive healthy, positive behaviors of going, okay, if I'm hardwired to care what other people think, let's just make sure we're caring about it for the right reasons. So we're not caring like about superficial stuff, but we're using that like biological drive to go, okay, I'm going to let that drive me to be a good person. I'm going to let that drive me to be someone who treats others well. I'm going to let that drive me to be someone who leads by example, whatever it might be.
Practical example here.
Yeah.
When this relates to something more practical that I experience on a day-to-day basis, when how this leads to like this need for social feedback, what people think, to lead to how people care about their image with their career, like a certain career pathway, or maybe you can even link this back to they were brought up with the belief from their parents that they had to have like a university qualified job, they had to have this certain standard, certain income, and then how that then feeds their money mindset with having to have a luxurious lifestyle and never feeling fulfilled in a career. How never feeling fulfilled in a career or even a relationship can feed back to the way that they were brought up before, because they rebelled against that. They changed against that whole thing, but it's still part of their psyche. But then also how it feeds into the social feedback regarding to the need to change our bodies now, or the need to have this image of a certain mother. So the career, the body, and I guess the family life, the perfect family life.
Totally. That's a really good point. And that's where the one you mentioned, particularly around feeling like you have to have a certain type of career or job or lifestyle because that's the pressure you feel from parents, whatever. That's obviously an example of an unhealthy version of letting someone else's opinion affect us. That's obviously the kind of thing we don't want to be doing. What I'm referring to is that whether we like it or not, we're going to have this inbuilt thing in our brains that cares what like other people think. Like it's why we have a self-image, and whether we like it or not, we're social creatures. And so what I'm saying is let's use that biological drive to not to let us make silly career decisions and pursue things we don't care about, because that's an example of a bad version of that. But let it drive us in a positive direction. Let it drive us to find more purpose. Let it drive us to pursue that business idea that's really scary because we want to have a positive impact on other people. Let it drive us to be, to shape our self-image as someone who treats others well, as someone who has compassion and empathy for others. Because whether we like it or not, we're kind of going to care what other people think. So let's use that to our advantage and let it drive some positive behaviors. Obviously, to a healthy extent, we don't want that then to become a vanity thing or an obsessed with what other people think thing. But up to a point, I think it's something that we can use positively to drive positive behaviors and changes, rather than it necessarily being such a negative thing. But as you say, it becomes negative or unhealthy when we allow it to be, oh, well, I need to have a certain type of job because my parents think I should, or whatever. Or I need to not say what's meaningful to me because I'll be worried about what other people think. That's where it gets a bit dangerous. But if we can flip that and go, okay, like rather than I'm afraid of what people will think about me saying this, let's look at it from the other perspective of I have something that will positively impact other people. Let that drive the behavior to say the thing that is meaningful to me. Anyway, we're probably getting a little off on a tangent here from what we really intended, which is like helping people mentally manage lockdowns and really realistically any challenging or stressful period. Lockdown is just obviously
realistically for people going through the lockdown or going through any challenging time, which is what he said this is going to be all about. If you try to actually sit with yourself and ask yourself deeper questions with why exactly is this challenging, because it's threatening your status quo, which is exactly what we've been talking about. It's threatening your social feedback because now you're actually faced with being in, like, you have more contact time with your family, so you have to uphold a certain standard in your perception anyway. You have, like, some careers are going to be shackled. Your position in your career may be shackled, like the way that you now approach your career, all of that stuff is in the unknown. So all of this stuff matters if you actually pause and sit with yourself, which so many people don't do. Like, people are too busy looking for something as an escape. They're always looking to do something to distract themselves away from actually facing themselves, which is exactly why you lose your identity when shit like this happens. So if we you can't change your mind with your mind. So we have this thing that you just mentioned, like, imagine it like a cloud. We know that you cannot change your psychology with mindset techniques, with just thinking things. So what are some physical tools that we can do to cope with these thought patterns, and how they can relate to both challenging times or uncertain times, or times where we just lose that sense of identity, using the example case study of that chick that I told you, or for example, this guy, for example, who said to me, I will quote this. He said, I think I'm starting to lose myself. Maybe I had an epiphany, but this one is just about me going to be who I am and stop being what people expect me to be. But the thing is, I've been saying this for literally the last 6 months, and it's only now that he's listened to it. So how can we make it easier for people to realize this stuff, and tools to get this stuff moving, and to not be like, oh, I had this epiphany, I'm going to do this. But then after saying the epiphany, you know how people will say something, but then they don't act on it and they go back to doing their ways. And it's almost like they never had that epiphany.
We all fall into that trap, myself included at times, for sure. You make a great point about, in terms of mentally managing lockdowns, let's just stick with lockdown, but really any challenging period. That far and away, the people I've found who struggle with it the most are those who are not prepared to actually just sit with who they are. And as you said, they're constantly living this life of distracting themselves from being inside their own head for 10 minutes. You know what I mean? And so the challenging thing about lockdown, among many other things, of course, we haven't, something I want to interject with is I meant to say this at the start, is to make a point that what we're sharing here, or what we want to share, are kind of universal principles. And realistically, everyone's circumstances are obviously going to dictate how useful that is for them, I suppose, in the sense that it's not really fair to say that if someone's business has just been completely flattened, and they're struggling to pay the mortgage, and they're terrified about like putting food on the table for their kids and all that kind of stuff, it's obviously they're in a much more challenging situation than those of us who haven't lost a job, or don't have that kind of financial stress. So it's not really fair to say that we can just like use some mindset techniques that are going to allow that person to cope just as well as someone whose situation is more fortunate. So, but more so what I wanted to get across is that what we're wanting to share here might just help that person whose life has been like completely flipped upside down, and it might help them go from a 2 out of 10 to a 4 out of 10, or, you know what I mean? Or like it might just help them get through, and they get through lockdown and they're at a 5 or a 6 out of 10, as opposed to a 1, 2, 3. So the fact is, some people are going to struggle more than others, and that's normal. And they have to, one of the things we'll talk about is acceptance versus attachment, right? And emotional processing of actually feeling the emotions and not trying to distract ourselves from them. That's acceptance. But yeah, I just wanted to touch on the fact that realistically, like, I'm well aware that some people are a lot more, myself, like I'm very fortunate with the situation I found myself in this lockdown. And so therefore it's not fair to say that, someone whose whole business or whole world has been flipped upside down will be able to just like use some mindset stuff and get through it, as well as someone whose circumstances are much more fortunate. But what we can perhaps what we're talking about like not wanting to distract themselves from where they're at, and actually just sitting with it. So that probably, if we bring like almost everything we do, we can bring back to the Buddhist principle, I'm sure you're familiar with it, of like attachment is the root of all suffering and acceptance is kind of the antidote. And so that simply means that we cause ourselves more suffering than necessary when we are attached to how we wish things were and it's not how they are. So, if someone, so the simple example that applies to virtually every person in lockdown is that if you're going to sit there for 2 or 3 weeks investing all this mental energy in how much you wish you weren't in lockdown, that is, you are attached to how you wish things were. And the fact is, lockdowns are happening whether you like it or not. So sitting there in that mental state of being attached to wishing you weren't in lockdown is just mental energy that you are causing yourself more suffering than you otherwise might need to experience. And so obviously acceptance becomes the antidote of going, like, accepting the fact that this is what is, it's how it is, let's work with where we're at. And part of that means that, or that also stems from our principle that we talk about a lot of taking ownership of your headspace. You are 100% responsible for what goes on in here, regardless of external circumstances. Because a lot of people are sitting here and going, well, the government put us in lockdown and it's their fault that that I'm in such a bad mental state or that I'm struggling. And it's like, well, like, maybe, but the fact is, like, if it wasn't locked down, at some point in time, there's going to be some other circumstance, maybe that wasn't the government's fault, maybe it was a natural disaster or fucking whatever it might be. Like, the fact is, life's going to happen and other people are going to do what they're going to do. And if you're going to live the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years of your life with your mental state forever at the mercy of what other people are doing and what other what external circumstances are, and if there are lockdowns, and if what the government are doing, and this and that, then you are, whether you like it or not, you're not taking ownership of your headspace. And so that basically is almost the same principle as attachment is the root of all suffering, and acceptance is the cure. So it's accepting that we're in lockdown. This is the situation. Whatever's happened, happened. If it really sucks, cool. Like, feel those feelings, because part of that principle of ownership of your headspace is not saying that we should have positive emotions all the time. That's impossible and unhealthy anyway. It's more about accepting that if you've got like some serious stress, frustration, sadness, disappointment, whatever it might be with this situation, actually feeling those emotions, and as you said, sitting with them, not trying to avoid them.
I just want to get one word here.
Ownership. Yeah.
Empathy. But it's not, it's
for yourself.
Empathy to yourself. Yeah. Too many people are not actually being kind to themselves, not being patient to themselves. At the end of all of this, I'm going to link it all the way to how you can progress forward. But this is honestly something that you guys need to sit with, and something one of my girls said in her post I think I shared it with you. She was like, I don't see the importance of like feeling the feels, of doing a gratitude journal, of doing this, doing that, because I don't see how it changes my physical self. And this is why it is so important. Like, Thomas is showing you why it is so important. And once I link it to exactly why, and to like the fitness and nutrition, you're gonna see why all this stuff is something that is it's the pillar that Thomas was talking about. It's the pillar that everything else is actually built upon. If you don't have this strong pillar, sorry, he was having some housemates just having.
Sorry about that. Yeah, just people were talking. It's all good. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you don't have these strong pillars that are going to hold up your world, as Thomas is about to talk about perspective, but if you don't have these strong pillars, which may not look like they're actually impacting your physical self, but that's exactly what comes on top of it, because they are holding up your perspective of the world, as you see it, your core beliefs, your identity. And you have the ability to renovate your house at any time, but you can't renovate your house without having the material there.
I like that. It's cool.
Empathy,
yeah, that's it.
Perspective.
Empathy is really king, isn't it? And we're going to go back and forth a little bit here, but bringing it back to what I said before about human connection, the relationships and human connection, number one factor in resilience, in well-being, in quality of life, like the quality of our relationships and our sense of connectedness to other people. And so one of the first things we can do in that instance, of course, requires being connected to ourselves, and empathy is huge for that. So when we relate that to the ownership principle, or to the attachment versus acceptance principle, taking ownership of your headspace, is being responsible for how you feel internally, but equally it's therefore taking or having empathy for yourself, in that you accept the emotions you're feeling. And rather than spending several weeks or several months kind of resisting them and being frustrated at how sad you are or how stressed you are, and kind of just trying to spend the whole time wishing you weren't feeling that way. Empathy for yourself and acceptance is actually sitting and feeling those feelings, like not trying to distract yourself, not spending 12 hours a day on your phone, all that kind of stuff. I know it's really easy to slip into that trap, but it's accepting those emotions and actually feeling them, like not avoiding them, but actually feeling them, and embracing the fact that they suck and that we're allowed to have negative emotions and we're allowed to feel them, and that they have a purpose. They serve a very healthy purpose. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to feel them. You spoke about wanting to give people kind of somewhat practical or tangible actions to actually work through that. Like movement is huge. Exercise is probably the number one tool on the planet that we have for managing our overall, okay, not the number one tool, but it's one of the number one tools. Like if you could take a pill that packaged up all the benefits of movement, like people would just be falling over themselves to get it. Do you know what I mean? In terms of exercise and movement make us smarter, calmer. They help us with social anxiety. They help us connect. They help us develop better empathy. They help us feel more dopamine. Or it helps us feel more dopamine. Like the range of benefits we get from being physically active are just absurd. And so for that reason, I think it's really dangerous to fall into the trap of the gym's shut, so therefore I can't exercise, and I don't like exercising in my living room. It's like, well, neither did I. Go for a walk. Like I can't stress enough how powerful walking is, because the other major thing that you can do with a walk, particularly in lockdown, is get out in nature. And being in nature isn't just this kind of nice, like little pleasant thing that we can do and see some trees and stuff. It has that. It's awesome. But as mammals, or as animals, which we are, we're biologically hardwired to need connection to nature. Like from that book Lost Connections, which is Johann Hari's book all about anxiety and depression. And one of the 9 major causes of anxiety and depression is not spending time in nature. They did all these studies, all these observations on animals, which like wild animals that they captured and then brought to a zoo that wasn't similar enough to their natural environment. And the animals started displaying like typical symptoms of like anxiety and depression, in the sense that they were losing their appetite, acting really frantically. Some of them started self-harming, like animals will start like birds will pull their feathers out and shit like that, because they've been removed from their natural habitat and they don't feel like they have their natural kind of needs met.
There may be some people here that don't actually feel that connection to nature, like you're saying. They may think this is all voodoo and stuff, but something that I can make a little bit more relatable there is I don't feel like I need a forest of trees or water or mountains or whatever the hell to make me feel better, to make me feel all this other stuff. I don't need that type of nature. But one thing you're not realizing is that's not what nature encompasses in and of itself. For me, just being out and feeling the warmth of the sun on my skin, being out and feeling actual fresh air on my skin, breathing it in, that's it. To me is nature, and it has transformed so much of what I do, because the importance of dopamine, like that to me has allowed me to like just be more present, which a lot of people aren't.
Totally. That's huge, Ruby. And that's what that was kind of leading into what I wanted to say, which is that, you don't need to go and spend the day in a rainforest to get the benefits of nature. I mean, you don't have to live by the ocean to get the benefits of nature, but every person listening to this is going to have some kind of park within probably 5 k's of their house where you could just walk around that, or even literally just walking down as you say, walking around your block and just taking in the trees on the street, taking in the sky, taking in the clouds, taking in the feeling. When we get into mindfulness, we talk about using all the senses, right? And so it's because we all know the feeling of being anxious, and like one of the key things of feeling anxious is that your head is noisy and you feel kind of trapped inside your head, and it's very noisy and tense. And so when we can get into our body, because our body is so responsible for, or so related to our emotions and our mood, and we can kind of use our senses more, as you say, feel that, like consciously paying attention to the sun on your skin, the wind on your skin, the fresh air, all those kind of things, how much you appreciate clouds, things like that. That is taking advantage of movement and nature, 2 in 1, and realistically mindfulness as well. So that is kind of a somewhat physical, practical action people can take. You mentioned dopamine, something that I wish I'd done more of during the first lockdowns last year, and I found extremely helpful during lockdowns here back in February, wherever it was. But it was just helping me in life general, was to kind of build a bit of a checklist of, I drew up a chart of a checklist of kind of activities I wanted to be ticking off each day. And then I had Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And it's being able to tick off those little tasks and get that little dopamine hit of, it could be something really simple. It might be that you went for a 5-minute walk. It might be that you spent, I put on my list the term luxuriating, which is my term for making sure that I take a moment to just really, truly enjoy with all my senses, a few different experiences. So eating really delicious food. If I'm with my dogs, it's just being with them and just really enjoying the feeling of their fur on my hand and how happy they are and those kind of things, which, again, just having a list of things that you want to tick off for your day. They could be so simple, but if you you might not tick all of them off every day. If you tick off a couple and you get a couple of days in a row, you're getting a streak. So that's kind of an example of how you can give yourself a sense of direction and purpose through lockdown. But I totally get that, because I've been there probably early last year, that sometimes when you're mentally struggling, it's so hard to get yourself up to do even the most basic things sometimes. And so a tool, I'd be curious to hear what you've been finding most useful to get yourself through lockdown, because you've obviously been in one for about 3 or 4 weeks now. I was just going to say that one of the most powerful things we have in our arsenal, which relates to the human connection relationships thing, is that if you can't make yourself feel good, make someone else feel good. That's what's the word? A kind of an override of no matter what mood you're in, if you can do something that brightens someone else's day, you know that, one, empathy for them, empathy for yourself, but equally you get your own little hit of oxytocin and all this good brain stuff when you make other people feel good. So that is something that you can do if you're struggling through lockdown, to go, well, I can't make myself feel good. I don't have it in me to go out for a walk. I don't have it in me to cook nutritious food, whatever it is. Cool. But find someone else in your life that you care about and make their day better. Just message them, check in on them, support them, whatever it might be. And at least then you can finish the day. We'll talk about gratitude. You can get to the end of the day and go, well, at least I accomplished that. I checked in on my mate who I haven't heard from, and he was struggling. And I know that, you've accomplished something positive for the day, and you've made someone else feel good. I reckon that's pretty impactful. But I would be curious to hear, Ruby, what you have found useful for getting through your lockdown the last, 4 weeks, maybe?
That's probably going to be a really good thing to start with, is I don't even freaking know. And that's a video, but it's has it been 4 weeks already?
I think so.
The only thing that's really freaking threw me around is the fact that I never know what bloody day it is anymore. I think it's Monday when I wake up, and then when I finish my workout, I'm like, oh wait, no, it's Wednesday. And then before I know it, I'm thinking it's Thursday. This is what I mean by, Thomas was saying, no matter what the hell you decide to do with your time, whether you want to feel sorry for yourself, be absolutely impractical and not actually physically, just give yourself some bloody tough love and get your ass up and try and just do one thing. Time's going to pass anyway. Time is passing regardless. What are you going to do with it? Because in that time, you are losing, I just kind of, there is so much that you can start to amplify on, and that's pretty much been my COVID. That's why I don't even know what bloody day it is in lockdown. What have I been doing more? I've focused so much more on my podcasting. Why? Because it's like we spoke about in our last podcast. What are our core beliefs? My core belief is validation. It's recognition. It's I guess accomplishment in terms of I'm putting out good stuff into the world that can actually help people. And I have something that's validating me because I know that it's doing something for someone, if that makes sense. So the fact that I am doing more in terms of that and able to focus more on being able to, I now have resources that I can link my clients. That makes me feel powerful, because it's like,
awesome.
okay, you're struggling with this. Try like listening to this podcast. Yeah, okay, but then there are stories that people tell themselves that they're not a podcast person. And I guess this comes down to not being able to slow their mind, or not being able to focus, or whatever it is, or just the stories that they tell themselves. Just like something has to serve us in a particular way for us not to connect to something. Like, as much as I would love to be reading books right now, and the story behind that is, the story I tell myself is that I just can't focus on books. I can easily set a time if I wanted to. I could set a time block and be like, right, no computer, shut computer, no this, shut that, just read the book. But it's obviously not enough of a pull for me to want to do that. And that comes with everything else as well, which is where you need to connect it to stuff. See, for me, it's not really that important in retrospect, even though I would love to do it, because I have this massive source of, if I wanted to, I could listen to an audiobook. Like, I know that what serves me most is audio and visual. I love podcasts because I love podcasts. I'm choosing that over the books. But if I found that I needed to do something uncomfortable to actually move me out of the current state I'm in, then connecting it to the outcome is going to help me. Like, I'm not big on paper writing, book stuff like that. But when I was struggling a couple of years ago, I was doing my gratitude journal, and I had this 5-step process where I'd write 3 things I'm grateful for, 3 things that happened in the day that made me happy, and 3 things in the day that were wins and accomplishments, and 3 things that made me smile. And then there was at the bottom one line that said, what is one thing that you can do to prove a point today for tomorrow? Or what is one thing, something like that. And I was doing that every single night. Did that help my physical body? No, but it did, just not directly. Just like how sleep doesn't directly make you fat, but it indirectly makes you fat, like a lack of sleep, that type of stuff. And this is where I wanted to not really dig into me, but make what you said relatable. So the house analogy, if you can't raise the roof, which you really can't in lockdown, and you really can't when shit's going down the sink, raise the floor. If you can't raise the roof, raise the floor. And something else that you touched on, I made a note of this too, is it's almost like, I can't remember what you said, but something you said made me realize it's almost like seeing everywhere that you aren't right now in any journey. Oh, I'm not there yet. Oh, I still have all this to lose. Oh, I'm still not happy with my body. It's thinking of everything you lack instead of seeing how far you've already come. Not sitting with yourself, not giving yourself credit, not celebrating your wins more, not practicing gratitude. And this is going to be a really good segue into gratitude in a second, but I also wanted to touch on the human connection that you said. This is where you can actually use social media to your advantage in a positive way. Curate your feed to be stuff that actually grow you, make more connections online. Like, I love social media, and I've always loved social media, and people are shooting at it, but it's my way of connection, and I love human connection. I feel validated on it because I work online, and a lot of my really good friendships, like, we live in a digital age now. A lot of relationships are, as crazy as it sounds, not down the road anymore. They're people in different suburbs, people in different states, in different countries. Human connection doesn't just have to be physical. And the last thing I want to touch on, which is going to be the best segue into how this relates to your physical body and how you can use this lockdown. Lockdown is an amazing opportunity for you to have more time to be more introspective of who are you and what is it that actually gives you joy, because then when you go back into the place that you were once before, you have a lot more purpose. And something that I'm going to start saying now, because I saw it yesterday, it's not just about taking action, and it's not just about being aware. It needs to be aligned with you and your direction. So it's aligned awareness, aligned action. You do what you do on purpose, but with purpose. So back to what I was saying, like all this stuff that he's been speaking about, I've been speaking about, these are this, like we started this whole thing talking about motivation. whole thing was about motivation. But what did we say it was? We said it was a skill. All these things that we are talking about right now are skills. And this, it's like, you can apply these to anywhere in life. The skill of actually being resilient in times like this. Like he mentions just going to have coffee now, he's more grateful for it, or just going down to the park, he's more grateful for it. It's like, so what? It's just going to the park, like big whoop. Perception is a big thing. Like it could be as simple as just like finally being more mindful with your food. Oh, big whoop, I was more mindful with my food. Perception, that's a really big thing, because that leads to a whole host of other things. Like there are so many different things that you can work on now that you never did before. And there's just so much we can like connect to how it leads into everything else. Like being more mindful in everything you do every day now, and being able to sit with yourself allows you to have better relationships at work, because you know yourself better. You're not going to allow someone else to manipulate you. You're going to actually know what drives you, and you're going to go for the right things instead of spinning your wheels later down the track. You're going to know what it is that fulfills you, so then you're not anymore clinging to just the gym. There's other things around you. And I've never gone through lockdown this positive before. Last time I was a mess. I was like, nah, I need to do this. I need to do this. I can't believe I lost this. And it was just me needing to lift heavy shit, because it was like, it gave me so much more gratitude for going into the gym. I used to slug myself in the gym before, and it was also when I was like prepping for my powerlifting meet, but it never felt like it was right. But being forced to sit with myself for all those months of lockdown forced me to actually do something other than what I was constantly doing every day, and making my life about fitness, about lifting, about everything that I do. Because even though I'm a coach and this is what I do, I have so much more to life outside of that. Well, no, I don't. My whole life is coaching. I'm just going to say that. My whole life is coaching, because why? It's purpose. It's what I love doing. But my whole life is not lifting weights, going to the gym, what I eat. That stuff just makes my life better. It gives me more tools for the toolbox in coaching. And coaching isn't just, in fact, it's nothing at all to do with the training and the nutrition. Those are tools that enhance your transformation, but you cannot do it without those pillars that we mentioned. So this is why it is so important. And it may not look like it impacts your physical body, but maybe you can even just freaking listen to this thing over again now that you heard my spiel on it, and actually apply it to your life. Because how can you have a strong house without these foundations? Because if one little thing collapses, you're lost, because you only have the whole house riding on that one pillar. You need to build several pillars to keep your house afloat. And pillars, that house, your body is pretty much your house as well.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
I guess I really want you to talk about gratitude, the stories we tell ourselves, and perception now, because they're probably the most important things in all of that.
Sure. That was a really, really fascinating little monologue, Ruby. I was really interested with several things you said. You made the point about the fact that coaching, putting out content that's useful to people, helping clients, all that kind of thing, is, on some level you're getting validation from it and social recognition, all that kind of stuff. And that's an example of what I spoke about earlier, of using that need to want to be significant and wanting to have meaning and be valued by other people positively, using it to drive behavior that where you go, okay, well, I'm going to use that to drive me to do something that helps other people. That's an example of healthily using that, caring about what other people think. Among, like, I know it's not the only reason that you do it, but my point is, like, using it healthily to drive positive behaviors. So that's a great example of that. And you said that obviously you've used this time to focus on building, really ramping up your podcast and pumping out more episodes and things like that. Again, that's an example of making sure that you've got a sense of purpose, a little project, a little something that you're working on through this lockdown. And so that kind of comes back to the gratitude and perception and perspective angle of lockdown is happening anyway, whether you like it or not. And again, we can apply this to any stressful, challenging circumstance. It's happening whether you like it or not, which means you have the choice to either spend the whole time frustrated and wishing that it wasn't happening, or you can accept the fact that it has happened, not spend 3 weeks or 3 months bitching about the government the whole time, and instead accept that it's happened, and then ask yourself the question, how could I view this as something I'm really grateful for? Because it's happened whether you like it or not, which means taking ownership of your headspace looks like asking yourself that question of how can I actually be glad that this is happening on some level? It doesn't mean that you can't also be frustrated. You can't also kind of wish we weren't in lockdown, but it's happening anyway. So how can you view it as something that at least part of you is deeply grateful for? And so we can use that to drive things like introspection, things like learning more about ourselves, things like asking ourselves the question, okay, how can I learn and grow from this? Because as I say, it's happening whether you like it or not. So we need to come away from things with the perspective of, as John Demartini, my messiah, says, we can view things as either on the way or in the way. So you can either look back on COVID in the last 12 or 18 months as being this terrible thing that you wish hadn't happened. But the fact is it happened anyway. So if you do that, you're just causing yourself more suffering than you need to. Instead, you can apply the strongest sense of gratitude you can and figure out what is most meaningful to me? What is my sense of purpose? What are my highest values? How can I have the perception or the perspective of lockdown or this challenging period as being on the way to contributing towards my sense of purpose and my highest values? How can I view this as somehow positively contributing towards what's most meaningful to me? And so for me, one of my like probably my number one priority in life is simply my sense of internal well-being and mental health, and basically mastering my internal world is the phrase that I use. And so for me, I take that and I allow that to give me the perspective of being grateful for literally everything that ever happens to me, because even if it's a challenge, it's allowing me to develop skills to better manage my internal world. I'll give you an example. I had a fight with a guy of sorts about a week ago here. A guy who he basically tried to physically remove me from his apartment because I said I voted for Dan Andrews in our last election. Most people in a conflict like this would be really distressed that it had happened. They'd be going, fuck up, this guy's a dick. I wish that this had not. They'd be wishing that this fight hadn't happened. To me, I actually gave the guy a hug. I stood up, I said, mate, I gave him a hug. I was like, he was really stressed out because of, financially with COVID and lockdowns and all that stuff. And I met him with empathy and compassion for this guy is just, projecting his internal world. He's hurting, he's stressed as hell, and he's taking that out on people who have a different opinion than him or whatever. And it was like, this has happened anyway. So I could sit here wishing that this hadn't happened, or I can view it as an opportunity to master my internal world. And so hence why I come at that with the approach of, I'm going to meet this guy with empathy and compassion and use this as an opportunity to better grow as a person, to better manage or develop the skills of empathy and compassion, to better manage or to best master my internal world in terms of what I allow to bother me. I could have sat there for the next, the rest of the night or the next couple of days really frustrated that this guy had tried to basically almost fight me, and instead it was like, hang on, how can I be glad this happened? It's like, well, because it's teaching me patience, it's teaching me compassion, it's teaching me empathy, it's teaching me to grow as a person and better manage my internal world. And
also if you actually pause, I want to relate this to binge eating because it's been my theme lately. So it's almost like if this sudden thing happens and you don't pause, and it's like, okay, so if he was to actually respond the way the other person expected him to, what would have that led to? It would have led to a massive fight, a massive blowout, a massive a catastrophe. And it's almost like surfing the urge. Okay, there's this urge for me to react. I'm sitting with it. I'm feeling it uncomfortably. I know that I want to respond, but I'm not going to do it anyway because I know the backlash is going to be worse than the action itself or any alternative thing. And I just, before you go on about how to approach something, how this relates to perception and stories that we tell ourselves, is I'm gonna say at Stretch with Eve on Instagram posted this amazing thing about being able to build a positive narrative and seeing and appreciating the brighter side of any dark situation. She says, being able to see the positives doesn't negate the suffering and discomfort we feel during this time. And then she goes on to say, but having things to be grateful for, focusing on what I can control right now, provide and accept, make a hell of a difference in letting go of the shit you cannot control. Thinking about what's going to happen in the future, thinking about how uncertain this is, how overwhelming that is, isn't going to take you anywhere further. And it's the same with the case that he was just talking about. Reacting in that way isn't going to take him any further. Is that the person he wants to become? Does he want to be aggressive and then form this negative relationship and then feel and then have the guilt and all the resentment happening after that? Now, the thing most people struggle with is that pause moment, though. Until you master the pause, you are at the benevolence of the world. Like I think that's the word to use, I don't know, but you are at the feet of the world. Like you are not in control. This is where I guess gratitude really helps, taking ownership and reframing the stories that you tell yourself. So how exactly does gratitude come into all of this in a way that we can start feeling better about a situation, and how gratitude can actually help us learn our identity, because we're not thinking so much of what we lack? Because I think that is the source of so many problems that face us, is that we're just thinking about everything that's absent. Even in terms of food, we're thinking of it's straight away we're in this restriction mindset of everything we can't have. In terms of our body goals, it's thinking in terms of we're not there yet, we haven't done this yet, we don't look good yet, maybe once I'm fitter I can actually start going to the gym. I think it's, once I said raising the floor, but how can gratitude and the stories that we tell ourselves actually move us forward in wrapping up the whole lockdown? Just not just lockdown, because I think this all addressed what we wanted to address. It really did, because now it's actually giving us direction from what we can do with lockdown to how we can apply it to ourselves now and moving into the future, and why it is so important now to foster all of this, so that when we come out of whatever situation it is, it's not going back to where we once were, or okay, life can start again, but it's just a continuation of everything that was, because time didn't just pass, you actually made use of it. So how can gratitude really help with this, and emotional processing, and I guess everything you were saying before about radical ownership and radical acceptance?
You said something and I was like, that's the best thing ever, I want to touch on it, and then it slipped my mind. And anyway, it'll come back to me, but it was really clever and I wanted to emphasize it, but we'll get there. Look, in terms of this whole thing, as I spoke about, and the example of the confrontation with that guy, is that things outside of our control are going to happen. Lockdown's going to happen. Other people are going to act the way that they act. And so taking ownership of our headspace and acceptance versus attachment, things like that, and allowing gratitude to become the key principle, is that we can choose how we view these situations as being on the way rather than in the way towards where we want to be in life. And so a lot of it in some ways relates to the identity piece of when we are talking about personal growth, personal development, living a fulfilling life, achieving all our goals, all that good stuff. We kind of need to operate from that future place of, okay, where do I want to be in 6 months time, 12 months time, a couple of years time, or more importantly, who do I want to be? And then working backwards and going, okay, in order to be that person, I actually need to kind of become that person now, in terms of ask myself, how would that person act in any given situation? And then that, when we work gratitude into the equation, allows us to view any circumstance, any situation like lockdown or confrontation or whatever stressful thing it might be, and ask ourselves, how is this actually contributing positively in some way towards who I want to be and where I want to be? Now, sometimes that might simply be that it's showing us what we don't want. But oftentimes it's simply that if we have the view of, I want to be the master of my internal world, which I think everyone should ideally have that perspective of taking ownership of your headspace and then recognizing that you want to have the best possible headspace and be in control of it, well, you can then view circumstances that most other people are complaining about, like lockdown, and go, I'm viewing this as an opportunity to grow, as an opportunity to, as you said, sit with myself and learn more about who I am and what's really meaningful to me, what really lights me up. Go through a process of learning what my personal values are, things like that. Do you know Mojo Crow? Are you familiar with him? Ben Crow? Mojo Crow is his Instagram thing. He is sort of in the life coaching, headspace coaching, resilience space, works with Ash Barty and Dylan Olcott and a few other like footy players and celebrities and stuff. And I was just going to make a recommendation for people. He's just produced an app called the Mojo Crow app. And they do some pretty cool work around kind of like writing your own story and figuring out what your purpose is and a few other things like that. And one of the questions they ask is identify what your earliest, happiest memory is or was, and being clear on why that was so meaningful to you, what feelings did you have around that, and allowing that, recognizing that is probably the most authentic, like fulfilled version of yourself almost, and how can you replicate those emotions today? Anyway, Mojo Crow, good follow for people to check out. But the amazing thing about gratitude is simply that it allows us to perceive virtually any situation, even the negative ones, as something that at least we're now glad happened. Now you can simultaneously be frustrated by something, unhappy about something. You're allowed to feel sadness and distress and disappointment and still be grateful for something. Like that's the key. We tend to have this dichotomy of I'm either happy about something or I'm unhappy about it. And if something is negative and challenging, that therefore I wish it didn't happen. But you're allowed to be frustrated and stressed out by lockdown, or disappointed, or maybe your whole world has been fucking shattered because your business has had to shut, and maybe you've lost friendships, or you're feeling really anxious and stressed and isolated and whatever there will be people who are going through that, and we don't want to trivialize the magnitude of that for some people. But my point is that it is possible to be feeling those feelings, and as we said, not avoiding them, but actually actively feeling them, and simultaneously be grateful for something, and simultaneously be viewing say lockdown or whatever challenging situation as something that we're glad on some level has happened, if we're aware of the upsides, if we're aware of how it's teaching us to grow.
I've got 7 words.
And
don't be afraid. Yep. Don't be afraid to ask for help. People are scared to ask for help. Continue. That's just so important.
No, that's brilliant. Yeah,
you're talking about people that are really struggling. Like, seriously, do not be afraid to ask for help. I can't believe we're in touch on any sooner, because you can't get through shit alone a lot of the time. Like, we cannot. This is like, we touched on human connection, but we never mentioned help and support. You need to ask for help. You need to be vulnerable. Can we talk about vulnerability in all of this as well? Like, we need to learn that vulnerability grows us. Vulnerability is untapped potential. It's a chance for growth. It's showing us where we can actually excel, because we're vulnerable in those areas. We're weak in those areas. And it's just like, you're zooming the fuck out. You like growth, just like progress, isn't just about one dimension. It's not just one direction. You can grow in terms of things outside of your physical, because your outer world is dictated by your inner world. Your inner world dictates your outer world. Continue. I just need to say, ask for help if you need it.
No, that's massive. That's honestly, as we said, human connection, social relationships, probably the biggest factor in resilience and health and well-being. And asking for help is a major element of that. And asking for help is a vulnerability, right? And so we do probably need to relate that to, as you wanted to touch on a few times, the stories we tell ourselves, in that we tend to have these stories in our head. Sometimes we're not truly aware of them, that asking for help is weakness, or that if I ask this person for help, that they're going to think something of me, or whatever it might be. And the thing about that's often related to shame, and shame is this emotion that it can be really crippling. But the amazing thing about shame is that it basically dissolves the second that you put a spotlight on it, in the sense that the second that you actually admit what you're feeling and how you're maybe struggling, and admit that to someone else, the shame more or less dissolves, because shame is something that we don't need. It really helps to have other people witness it and hold space for it, and then accept you for it. So relationships are huge, but
Except
the other example I was going to use is that a lot of people have so many stories around, for example, seeing a therapist. They have this story that like, oh, if I see a therapist, that means I'm broken, or people are going to judge me, or this or that. And like, that's a bullshit story, because the fact is the information's out there. You could do so much research into this. A lot of the time I get really frustrated because people are attached to their struggle, they're attached to their suffering. And so they actually stay committed to stories that stop them from getting help, because that would force them to acknowledge that story may not be true. You know what I mean?
I love this.
That's a tangent.
I love that topic. Keep going into it. I love that topic. Keep going, because shame and that tangent you're going into right now is so powerful, and it links everything together.
It's massive.
We're talking about acceptance at the very start, and it's the acceptance that can drive a lot of our feelings and perceptions about things in a negative way. So touching on this shame, as you guys can listen to this thing again, but shame and the tangent that I'm gonna push Thomas into are so important. So.
No, spot on. Fair enough. It is. It's a really important thing to understand, because typically we're resistant to asking for help because we have shame around the thing that we're asking for help with. Because we, as our brains love to do, we make meaning out of things. We tell ourselves stories. We make meaning out of, if I need help with this, that means something about me. It means I'm not smart enough, strong enough, capable enough, brave enough, whatever enough. And so we start to tell ourselves stories about things, and we make it personal, rather than it just being, something that is. And we tend to sort of get ourselves a little too hyper fixated. Now, this relates back to the identity piece, actually, that if we have our identity too wrapped up in one particular area, and then we're struggling with that, well, then we're going to have a lot of shame around needing help with that thing, because we think, well, if my entire identity is wrapped up in this thing and I need help with it, and I'm not strong enough or smart enough or clever enough or resilient enough to manage this thing, then who the hell am I without it? And I'm not good enough for this. So then we feel shame about asking for help with it. And so if we can do, as we kind of spoke about earlier, like diversify our identity a little bit and recognize that we have so many things about us as a human being, so many strengths, awareness of all of our values, recognize that we're so much more than just our job. We're so much more than just our career, or just our physique, or just our fitness, or just our relationship with a partner, or whatever it might be. And we don't have all of our personal identity eggs in one particular basket, then it becomes a little bit easier to ask for help with that thing, because we're not so defined by it.
You touched on this right before we started. Remember how you said, oh, by the way, this thing makes me anxious. Oh, wait, no, I don't want to say that this makes me anxious. I'm responding in this way. You just mentioned that attachment. So, yeah.
To give people that context, is that I said something that I do makes me anxious. I can't remember what it was.
You take too long.
It frequently takes me so long to do tasks, because I struggle way too much with perfectionism. And so I said that it makes me anxious when I have lots of tasks to do. And then I said, hang on, no, I don't like that language. I create a feeling of anxiety for myself based on, anyway. I was just being very careful with language, because language is huge. Okay, so I've got a couple other things I want to touch on in regards to lockdown and stuff like that, because the fact is that how you view the world, or how you view other people, is really just reflecting your own internal world, right? And so I had a conversation with a guy the other night who was talking about the fact that lockdown, I messaged you this last night, that lockdown or COVID, the last 18 months, has really revealed how most people are self-centered and out for themselves. And that was his statement, or his view, based on the whole toilet paper fiasco, when everyone was hoarding stuff in the supermarkets and all that kind of stuff. And that's a viewpoint that's held by a lot of people, that COVID and lockdown has revealed how most people are shit. And that is categorically not true at all. You have that perspective of humankind that everyone is selfish, because the fact is there are plenty of us, myself included, who have had far more focus on the upsides, in the sense that I've noticed, people are kinder for the most part and more patient, and that plenty of people smile at you more on the street now. And my point is that, you can choose
What
to
do you
view.
look for?
You see what you're looking for, right? Like, you can choose to focus on how some people were really selfish and hoarding food and all that kind of stuff. And you could also try to actually meet them with compassion and empathy and recognize that those people were just panicking and stressed out and operating from their level of consciousness. But the fact is that you can also choose to focus on just how many people have, used this time to go out of their way to help others with mental health, or positively impact other people in some way. I use the example of working hospitality, right? So I've been doing bartending up here at Hoffman, and coming into this, I had frequently heard from, I won't name names, but people I know who've worked a lot in hospitality who say that, working working hospo makes you hate humankind because so many people are rude and unkind and treat hospo workers poorly, right? That hasn't been my experience because I choose not to see it that way. There have been people who have been, impatient or unkind or whatever. I treat them with empathy and compassion and recognize that, imagine how much their internal world must suck if they're being rude and uncooperative or impatient with the person bringing them their food at a restaurant or whatever, or the person serving them their drinks. Whereas I've noticed plenty of people that I've interacted with that have been super patient and kind, and they've, we've mucked up something with their order, and they totally, meet us with compassion and empathy and go, oh, we get it, you're busy, it's cool. Like, my point is that you see what you're looking for, because I've seen plenty of examples of people being kind and helpful, and I've found the whole experience to be a net positive far and away, and had a lot of great interactions with people and gone, oh, there are so many people who are so nice. And the people who are, maybe unkind or rude or abrupt or impatient, it's like, I don't take it personally. I don't make it mean something about me. I don't make it mean something about them. I try to meet them with compassion and just go like, like, if that's how they treat other people, imagine how much it must suck to be inside their head. You know what I mean? Another example of that, we're going off on a tangent here, but I think it's a relevant one for managing our headspace. Another example of that is, I was talking about this with someone last night, is when you're in the gym and you're afraid of judgment, right? And I get it, because it can be an intimidating environment, but ultimately it's largely a reflection of how much you're judging yourself. But something that I want people to really focus on in that regard is, if you're in the gym and someone else is there and they are being judgmental of you, let's say hypothetically they actually are looking at you and thinking, you look like a dickhead because you don't know what you're doing, or some judgmental thought. If that person's over there and that's how judgmental they are being of you, who's a beginner or unconfident in the gym, imagine how much it must suck to be inside their head that is the kind of energy they're projecting outwards towards other people, that they can't just meet someone else with compassion and empathy, that they are being so judgmental of someone else who's just having a go at this thing and figuring out how to do this new skill. Like, if someone is being judgmental of you, like, one, why are you making their opinion mean so much? And two, try to actually, it sounds crazy, but like I said with the confrontation I had with that guy, try to meet the person who's judging you with empathy and compassion, and recognize that if that is their attitude that they project outwards, imagine how hard they are on themselves, and imagine how much it must suck to be inside their head if that's the kind of attitude they project outwards towards a beginner who's just trying to figure out the lat pull down at the gym. Do you know what I mean? Like, that, it sounds counterintuitive, but if you can meet
it's a really good point.
People who are judging you with compassion and empathy, it suddenly makes their opinion seem so much less scary, and you're like, oh my God, imagine how much it must suck to be that person.
Yeah.
Equally, it also forces you to, one, meet yourself with empathy and compassion, that you're allowed to struggle at this thing and be figuring it out, and you're allowed to suck and or be new at something, but also recognize that potentially are you the one being judgmental? Because frequently the people I find who are most afraid of judgment in the gym are the judgmental ones. As in, it's the beginners who go, oh, the gym is full of obnoxious people who just want attention, and look at her, how is she wearing that, and he's so vain and making all this noise and stuff. And it's like, and then they go, and I'm afraid of them judging me, they're intimidating me. It's like, can you have the self-awareness to recognize how judgmental you were just being within that statement? No wonder you're afraid of judgment, because you're judging others and you're clearly judging yourself as well. So pretty much if we just have empathy and compassion for ourselves and others, everything else basically gets better from there.
And that's the thing, if you can't, okay, having empathy for yourself, but if other people aren't reflecting that, and your fear of them judging you, it says more about them and them being unsure of themselves. Like, look at the, yeah, this is going to be really controversial. I'm sorry, so I'm prefacing that, but look at the people who are overweight, unfit, unhealthy, like categorically slobs. They're quick to judge fit people and evil eye them and all this other stuff. And it's like, it's those people because they're not willing to either put in, it's like, people might say, yeah, well, you can put any story you want to that kind of story, but it's like, whether you want to say no, it's not because they don't have the motivation to do what you're doing. It's just that they're happy with life the way it is. And it's like, well, if they're happy with life the way it is, then they should accept everybody, have radical acceptance, and not be judging people. If you're judging people, you are internally unhappy with where you are right now, or you are. This is why all these pillars are so important. I want to highlight something. I wrote it down because you gave me like I said, this isn't a mindful moment, it's a mindful mindgasm. Okay. So he touched on how we are so quick to focus on the negatives and not the positives. So like he was talking, oh, that was right. He was talking about the cafe. So this can come to everything. For example, people getting like, people judging them versus people complimenting them, all this other stuff, like bad comments on your social media versus good comments on your social media. 90% positives, but we focus on the 10% negative. This happens in our journey of health and fitness. Like I've been working with this girl for 2 years, and this is how negative self-talk is. And it's going back to that conversation I had with one of my guy clients, where I've been telling him for years that he needs to stop trying to impress other people or do things for other people and start actually looking deep within him, because he doesn't do that. And even though I've been telling him for years, he's only just saying it physically and admitting it now. Now, whether he acts on it is a different story, but it's like, we can know all the things, but you need to actually act on it. Like, this is why gratitude is so important. So back to what I was saying, we focus on only the negative. We don't catch ourselves winning enough. As a coach, I get people coming to me with more of their struggles, more of their struggles and more of the things that they did wrong than the things that they're doing right, then their wins. And then this feeds the stories we tell ourselves and our identity. Oh, I'm not good enough. Oh, I'm not enough. All these I'm not enough. And then we come from a place of lack again. And this is how important gratitude is, and how reflection and self-introspect is so important. You need to pause. Like, the pause is hard. Practice the pause. It's a skill you need to develop. These pillars that we are both talking about are so important.
That's such a good point about, and that comes back to needing to do journaling and gratitude journaling, because the amazing power of it, we didn't touch on, or we did touch on gratitude, but we probably didn't go deep enough on it, as far as when you actually consciously write down all of the wins, all of the things that are going well, say at the end of the day. And the example is, that's a perfect example of the client who has a bunch of things that they're succeeding with, but they're hyper fixated on the things that they're not doing well, the things they can't do, and they're not giving themselves enough credit for their growth. What we don't do super well as human beings sometimes is we don't integrate our wins, in the sense that that's a Brennan Burchard quote, in the sense that we go 6 months, 12 months, and you've made a lot of progress, but we haven't actually integrated the wins into our identity, and developed the belief that, oh, actually, I did all of these things, I can probably do more. But the really cool thing about gratitude, when we consciously practice it, particularly when we write it down, because writing takes, when we write things down, we're sort of combining left brain, right brain. So we're integrating things better, making it sink in better. Writing's really powerful. Very similar to the pensieve, as I think Alan Rickman says in Harry Potter, the thing where they take their thoughts out. Have you seen Harry Potter?
I love Harry Potter.
Yeah. So you know the thing where they can take their memories out and like look at them. Yeah. So I think of journaling as the same thing. You can take your thoughts out of your head. It's not so jumbled in here, and you can kind of see them in front of you. And that the thing about gratitude,
that actually elicits emotions, like clearly. Like if you watched Harry Potter, imagine, like, think about how Dumbledore was actually able to feel things better. Like, the expressions changed on his face because he was reliving it again.
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
absolutely. Yeah, isn't that cool analogy. The great thing about consciously practicing gratitude, in the sense that you actually, at the end of the day or at some point in the day, you actually stop, and you don't have to write it down. It's probably better if you do, but you consciously actually reflect on what are all of the things that went well today, and try to really, it's called somatically, which means somatic just means to do with the body. So like actually feel in your body, like how does my body feel when I think about that nice thing that happened, and consciously get a feel for it. And then that you mentioned a client who couldn't see the benefits of why they should do gratitude journaling. They haven't really felt the physical feeling yet that they get from consciously focusing on all of the things that are going well and listing them. But then equally, as I spoke about earlier, taking the things that are perceived as negatives right now, and write, how can I be grateful for this? How is this teaching me? How am I learning from this? How am I growing from this? How is this showing me what I don't want? How is this actually helping me develop better skills to manage my mind? Anyway, a really cool thing about practicing gratitude consciously, and they've scientifically proven this, is that it trains what's called our reticular activating system, which is the part of our brain that kind of decides what we notice, to notice more things to be grateful for. And so the perfect analogy is when you buy a new car. Like, let's just say you've just bought a new Toyota Kluger.
Actually, I just bought a new Hyundai. So
what'd you buy? You bought a Hyundai.
I just bought a new Hyundai, so that works.
Yeah, awesome. What model is it? Right.
The freaking the small one. Can't believe I can't remember the name of it. The Venue. Okay.
Hyundai Venue, right? I'm willing to bet now that you're going to notice a whole bunch of Hyundai Venues on the road. Like, you'll be out driving and suddenly you're seeing them more, right?
Okay, so
it's not that they're you go.
I'm gonna actually relate to this one, what you just said. Okay, so my car got written off, and all I wanted, once my car got written off, I was actually pretty happy that that it did, because I've had my car for 12 years. And I'm like,
oh, really?
I did not feel safe in my car because it didn't even have ABS braking. Like, it didn't have, anyway. And I had to roll down the windows. It's like, I looked for the positive in the fact that I just lost my car and I have to fork out money for a new car. I looked at the fact, hey, I'm going to have central locking now. I can actually click a button. Hey, I can actually like open all the windows. But anyway, I wanted an SUV. All of a sudden, all I can see around me are freaking white SUVs, because all I wanted was a white SUV. Never before in my life was I ever judging cars before. I became the most judgmental bitch when it came to cars ever since I decided that I wanted an SUV. Like, so judgmental. And then I found my Hyundai. So just had to reiterate that.
That's it. And that's a perfect example of you in your brain had decided that white SUVs were like relevant to you or important to you. You were interested in them. And so suddenly you're noticing them everywhere. It's not that there are more white SUVs on the road. You're just noticing more of them, because when you drive past one, it stands out to you, right? That's what practicing gratitude does, is it actually trains our brain to start noticing more and more and more and more and more things to be grateful for, because we've trained our brain that this is something that we care about. You know what I mean? And so that is the ridiculously powerful impact of practicing gratitude consciously. As in, like, if you ask any person ever, anywhere, are you a grateful person? They're going to go, oh, of course I am. Of course I'm grateful. Like, yeah, my life is so good. And it's like, yeah, are you though? Because I know a lot of people who had it so good the last 18 months, high paying job that they, was not impacted. They maybe just had to work from home, healthy relationship, like so much going right in their life. And the only thing that was really impacted was just that, like, they couldn't go to the pub, and they still spent 18 months bitching about how hard it was. And it's like, you're allowed to be frustrated by these situations, but a little bit of perspective of realizing that there are some people who don't have a roof over their head. And so, like, those are the people who say they're grateful, but are they grateful? They're not consciously really focusing on just how grateful they actually should be. Whereas when you start to really write things down, or like stop and just put your attention on how much you have to be grateful for, it trains the brain to just notice more stuff to be grateful for. And that allows us to realize how good we've got it. It allows us to then have this feeling of abundance of, oh, actually, I have so much that's going well for me. So that allows us to start to develop more of that belief that we are capable of having more to be grateful for, right? Like more of the things that we want. because we have an abundance mindset of, oh, I like when we have a lack mindset of, I don't have much that is going well in my life. Well, then, as we know, like our brain will create a reality that matches our beliefs. And so if we have a belief that we don't have much that's going well, then we're going to be kind of resistant to bringing in more that goes well, and we're going to be resistant to noticing anything that is going well.
I want to make it relatable to food again, because it's just what I do. So all you can think about is a restriction mindset for all the foods that you can't have when you're trying to diet down. All the fact, like I have a client that always seeks to eat out, always seeks this, that, and the other. But then there's other people out there that as soon as they start like some type of diet, they think about all the things they now have to give up instead of all the things they get to have. Like I get to have a bigger plate full of more wholesome foods. And it's like related to things outside of food, like eating in this way is going to give me a lot more energy. I spoke about this on my post today too. It's going to give me a lot more life. I can play with the kids. I have better sleep. I can poop like a normal person now. Like there are so many things to focus on, to be grateful for, that are outside of that as well. And this is why these skills are so important.
Yeah, totally. That's a really good point, actually, is the dieting thing, that if you're fixated on how restricted you are and how much you can't eat, then that makes you feel, or it stops you from noticing how much you're actually getting to eat or whatever. Really good example. So I guess that's the main. We've probably touched enough on gratitude, I suppose, that when you practice gratitude, it allows you to notice more that you're grateful for. That allows you to develop an abundance mindset, belief about yourself that you have so much going well in your life, which gives you the belief that you're capable of just attracting more and more stuff to be grateful for. Pretty much, gratitude is key to abundance. It's it'll come to me after the call, but there was something you said earlier that I remember. I said I couldn't remember what it was, and I wanted to touch on it because it was very impactful and important. But anyway, we'll talk about that on another podcast, I suppose. Was there anything else in particular? I'm just thinking about in terms of the notes we made. Maybe one thing we haven't touched on that I thought was important in terms of managing stressful situations and managing stress in general, particularly perhaps challenging situations like lockdown and things like that, is actually getting familiar with the worst case scenario, which Tim Ferriss calls it fear setting. So basically, in order to kind of overcome fears, so to speak, is actually getting really acquainted with them, in the sense that going, okay, like what is actually the worst case scenario? What is the thing I'm legitimately afraid of? And then going through a process of going, well, okay, what will that really feel like? Like what would actually happen? How will I deal with that? How will I have to respond to that? So I've kind of got a response plan, but equally having a contingency plan of, okay, so actually that's not the way I'm looking for, but having a contingency plan, and then having a okay, how do I prevent that happening? So in the case of lockdown, someone is terrified that they're going to lose their job and not be able to pay the mortgage, for example, right? So fear setting goes, okay, let's get acquainted with that. What's that going to feel like? Get familiar with those feelings rather than like them being this mystery. Don't make it about mean things about yourself. Don't make it mean that you're a failure or you're this or you're that or you're not worthy of love and acceptance and whatever. It's like, it's just something that might happen. Okay, if it happens, how will you respond to that? Do you have to get a job at Coles? Cool. Okay. Is that really that bad? Like, does the world actually end? Do you actually die if you have to get a job at Coles for a month to pay the mortgage? Like, I'm not saying that anyone wants to have to do that. My point is that if we actually get familiar with the worst case scenario and we realize that, whatever happens, we'll probably be able to respond to it. It might not be as bad as we think it's going to be. If you have to get a job at Coles, you have to move back in with your parents for a little bit. Okay. That'll suck a bit, sure. Let's not avoid those emotions as we spoke about. Let's actually feel them. But will the world really end if that happens? Probably not. So then suddenly now maybe it isn't such a terrifying, stressful thing. That's if it does happen. And otherwise, what could we maybe do now to prevent it happening? And so what we've done is we've taken this, because pretty much the biggest thing about fear is the unknown, right? Like we're afraid of these things being out of our control. when we understand that we have very little control over anything except our state of mind, we realize that things aren't that dangerous. But my point is that, like, if you actually get acquainted with what's the worst case scenario, then suddenly it's not so scary anymore, because you're familiar with it, and you have a plan for if it does happen. You have a plan for trying to prevent it happening at all. You realize that if it does happen, it might not be the worst thing ever. You can ask yourself the question, how could I be grateful if that did happen, right? Like, if you did lose your job, okay, that would really suck. Would it teach you to get more in touch with your emotions? Would it be a blessing because you realize that you actually hate the job you're in and you needed something to happen to be a catalyst to change jobs or whatever? Would it teach you to be the better master of your internal world because you're having to learn how to adapt to a really stressful situation? The point is that when we get familiar with the worst case scenario, we can then start to actually plan for it. We can get familiar with it. We can ask ourselves better questions about how we're going to manage it, about how we'll actually benefit from it. That's all I got on worst case scenario,
Okay.
but it's really important to be familiar with it.
I just want to emphasize the adapt, because acceptance and then adaptation is the most important thing, because if you're not going to accept it first, you're just going to this is when you start using the avoidance tactic, because you're not wanting to accept something for fear of judgment, fear of this, the whole acceptance thing, because we all want to be accepted. So you need to accept it, but then you need to adapt and make it work for you. And you need to change the story you tell about yourself. So I think that's like the best and like the best way to end this conversation. But I did take some notes that I really want to dig into on the next one, which we're going to get more into the worst case scenario, because I think that is what holds a lot of people back. Like, for example, I know some people who did not want to go to the gym whatsoever, or did not want to even work out at home because, for example, they just don't like the idea of working out at home. So they're not getting comfortable with the uncomfortable, or they refuse to go to the gym. They have access to the gym. I can't even freaking go to a gym right now. There are people out there that have access to a gym, but I need to wear a mask, but they're not going because they need to wear a mask. They're not getting comfortable with that, instead of the fact that I don't even have a freaking gym right now. Like, we're going to talk into that. That's going to be an example. And we're going to really go into the whole fear setting, the whole importance of the somatic, dig deeper into gratitude and shame acceptance, because
cool.
there was a lot there. So we'll leave the podcast here, and I hope you liked it. Like it, share it, subscribe, and even share it to just a friend if you don't want to share it publicly. But yeah, so we will see you on the next podcast, and Thomas will be coming on in a week or 2 or 3, whenever we both line up our times. Thank you.